Hi guys, so today I'm going to talk to you about soil for bonsai. Remember that we live in a country that is so vast. India is so vast, and what happens is climates are different from place to place. If you go to the extreme, if you go to the north, like Delhi and all that, there you find extreme climates, like it's either too cold or too hot. If you go to the coastal areas, it is very humid. If you look at the central part of India, more dry climates over there. So the climates are entirely different. So we could not copy soils, one another's soil. We have to do it according to whichever place we stay. So that means, suppose, like for example, I buy a plant from Calcutta and I bring it home to Andhra. So what happens is immediately, and if I just leave that particular plant in that particular soil, that Kolkata soil, what happens is the plant doesn't adapt well in my climate. So I have to actually change it into my climate. That is how exactly bonsai also works. So the misconception of asking people like what kind of soil you use, what kind of soil you use, you call up somebody in Florida and you find out about what soil they use, is actually a misconception. So I would rather recommend you kindly use what is locally available to you. So you will be able to grow them much better, and they will thrive much better if you use your local soil more than that. So all I can tell you is really the ingredients that are really required to mix in this bonsai mix, so that what happens is, according to the place that you stay, according to your climate, you can change the ratios of these ingredients and use it accordingly to your climate. There are two types of soils in bonsai. One is called the normal kind of compact soil, the other is called the granular soil, or it is called the coarse soil. The granular soil is where soil is not at all present in the mix, but then you have other ingredients like leeka, pumice, goat manure, river sand pebbles, you have coconut husk, cocoa chips, exactly, not husk but the chips. So they mix all this and then they put the plants in them. Most of the people like abroad and all, they use that, and and frankly speaking, it does work very very well. But right now in India, most of us are not using it, but it is under a lot of kind of experimentation is going on. There is a wonderful friend of mine in Bangalore called Mr. Anil Upadhyay. He's been researching on this composition of granular soil for the past 8 years. And I don't want to get into the granular part of the soil because I'm still not so confident about it myself. But then I will teach you about the normal soil mix that I am mixing right now. So if you want to know exactly what the ingredients are that I use on my particular soil, well, I use normal soil, normal red soil in the sense it's not the garden red soil that we use, because the garden red soil is a bit clayey. I mean, when you hold it like this, and you open your hand, what happens is it remains like a ball. I mean, when it remains like a ball, and when you open your hand, it shouldn't remain like a ball, it should split. So when your soil splits like that, it means it's very good for bonsai. So what happens is, do not use clay kind of soil like black cotton soil and such kind of soils. Do not use it for bonsai. Do not use vermicompost, because vermicompost holds a lot of moisture. So I would rather suggest not to use vermicompost, or peat. Do not use peat too, because peat also holds a lot of moisture and helps. And what happens is your roots end up getting suffocated with so much of moisture. So I use the normal mountain soil. In Hindi they call it moram. So I use that, which is more granular rather than more kind of soil in it, and I remove the big chunks of stones that are there in the soil, and I take that, and then I take manure. It can either be cow manure, it can be buffalo manure, or it can be goat manure, whatever you are interested in and whatever is available for you. I mix one portion of buffalo manure and one portion of goat manure actually whenever I use it for my plants. Then after that I use leaf mold, I use river sand, I use neem flakes, I use grit. Grit is nothing but small pebbles or small stones the size of a peanut, you know. But the best that I use is I use broken bricks which are, you know, I cut it to this size. I cut it to this size so that what happens is it doesn't occupy too much of space in my soil, and the smaller the piece the better it is. So I would recommend you to cutting it to a size of a, I mean to crushing it to a size of a peanut and use it. And remember, do not use brick powder when you're crushing the brick. A lot of powder also forms, so you have to sieve it, and so that, you know, the granular part gets separated from the powdery part, and you can use the granular and you can throw away the powdery part. Do not use the powdery part for in your soil. And to make it easy and cheap and best in your soil, I would rather recommend you to use brick pieces. Right now I have these crushed, this is called crushed leca, which they use for orchids and other kind of plants and all that. But since I have it, I'm using it. But if I didn't have this, I would have definitely gone for brick pieces, which works equally as good as leca, so you do not have to bother about it much. But so those are the ingredients, exactly what I use. So once again, mountain soil, river sand, neem flakes, manure, leaf mold, and grit. So these are the compositions that I use. Now when I tell you these are the ingredients, among these ingredients there are certain things that hold moisture, there are certain things that do not hold moisture. So if you look at what holds moisture in these ingredients, it is my river sand, because I use pure river sand, because the river Godavari is very close to me. So I use very pure river sand, which is available for me very easily. But people who live in the city, you use mostly construction sand, and construction sand doesn't hold so much of moisture as river sand, as pure river sand. So for me, river sand holds a lot of moisture. Leaf mold holds a lot of moisture. Brick pieces hold a lot of moisture, and even your neem flake holds moisture. So what happens is, for those of you who live in in a very harsh climate, like a lot of a dry climate, I would recommend you to increase the ratio of these which hold moisture. But to understand exactly which plant requires moisture and which plant doesn't require moisture, I can give you an easy technique to understand that, because it'll be easier for you to know exactly what kind of a soil your plant requires. Now all I want you to understand is, look at the leaf size of your plant which you are going to repot. If the size is big, that means it doesn't require too much of a moisture soil. For example, banyan trees, for example, ficuses, these do not require a lot of moisture in their soil, because they do not like moisture, so much of moisture. And if you put them in a moisture soil, what happens is they do not grow so well. So do not use too much of moisture for it. But the smaller the leaf, like Primna, Braya, what else other varieties you have, anything that has very tiny leaves, remember the moisture content should be very, very high. So you have to increase the moisture by increasing those ingredients that hold moisture, so that the soil will be able to supply enough of water to all the leaves, and the photosynthesis happens once the sunshine comes up and all the leaves have enough of water. But if you starve that plant from its moisture, what happens is your plant will not thrive well in that particular soil. So if you look at me, the way I mix my soil is, suppose now I take this, let us talk in portions. Now suppose I take this portion, this bowl over here. If I take one portion of the mountain soil, I take 2 portions of manure, that is 1 portion of buffalo manure, 1 portion of goat manure. I mix that again, I put that onto the soil, then I use 1 portion of river sand, then I use 1 portion of neem flakes, then I use 1 portion of leaf mold, and I use 1 portion, I use 2 portions of grit. Grit is nothing but broken brick pieces, very small, to the size of a peanut, like I explained to you before. You could also use marble chips. You could use crushed leeka, like this way. So it depends. But marble chips, what happens is they are very strong and they do not hold moisture, so I don't use them. But brick holds moisture because it absorbs the water when you pour it. And what happens is, even though the soil dries up once the sun comes up, the brick pieces hold the moisture for a little longer, and then they keep supplying it to the root system and to the plant. So I would recommend you to put things. So when I use 2 portions of grit, what happens is, my soil has become nice and aerated. There is a lot of air and oxygen going into my soil, and my roots, what happens is they grow very healthy, and a lot of fibrous roots form when you use a lot of grit in your soil. So that's why if you go to places like Calcutta and all, the soil is so sticky with what they use. So that's why when you look at their bonsai, it is usually the more hardy varieties that they can grow, but then I've never seen them growing the very kind of other varieties like Braya and stuff like that. I haven't seen them growing it so well over there and making bonsai out of it. So I would recommend you to use a lot of grit in your soil. Even if I put 4 portions of this, I'll be so happy about it. And so I never usually take calculate grit when I put it. I usually take it in my hand and I just put it into the soil. I mix up everything and I use it for my bonsai. And then a lot of people have asked me questions like, Veer, whenever you put do you use a separate combination for the materials and a separate combination for your bonsai? Well, no, I use the same combination for both. There is no kind of a variation between the soils for me, but the feeding techniques are entirely different. I will do an entirely different live show for that, so that all of you can understand exactly how you feed material, how you feed a completed bonsai. Whenever you use grit in your soil, what happens is, now most of us, we do not use grit in our soil, and when we don't use grit in our soil, what happens is, now we pot up our plant into a pot or into a packet or into a training container, whatever, or into a bonsai pot, whatever it could be. And now when we keep watering the plant, slowly the soil which is at that height over here, that soil, what happens is it starts getting compressed and slowly keeps going down and stops after a certain place. So that means the soil is getting compressed and your roots inside are getting suffocated. If you do not use grit, I'm meaning. So your roots are getting suffocated. And once your roots start getting suffocated, you start finding that your plant is not growing very healthy. You are finding a lot of unhealthy roots. You are finding your leaves are yellowing. All these are symptoms of the plant not doing well when you don't use grit. But if you use grit, what happens is that compactness doesn't happen. And even if it does happen to a certain extent, what happens is those small little pebbles or the small little grit that you have put into your soil will hold the soil and keep those gaps over there for the air and oxygen for the oxygen to be supplied to the roots over there. Not air, but the oxygen to be supplied. And so what happens is your roots do not get suffocate it. And another advantage for using a lot of grit in your soil is a lot of fibrous roots form. The more the fibrous roots that form, fibrous roots are nothing but the tiny, the most thin roots of your root system. They are the slaves of the root system. So the more the fibrous roots you have, always, the more healthy your plant is. So always remember to try and use a lot of gritty soil for your bonsai so that your plant can grow healthy. And always remember the grit should be very tiny pieces. Don't use big pieces, because if you use big pieces, they are going to take up a lot of space in your soil, and you won't, I mean, your plant, suppose you're potting it into a bonsai pot which is just so thick, and if you use stones about this big, a grit about this big, what happens is they are going to occupy so much of space in your bonsai soil, which in your bonsai pot, which is at this height. So what happens is, there's not enough of space for soil to be added, because the grit takes away most of the space. So that's why I always recommend break your grit to very tiny pieces, the size of a peanut, and use them in your bonsai soil. You cannot copy what I am doing. You can use what ingredients I am using, and you have to change the ratios. And I cannot help you to change the ratios, because I do not know exactly how your climate is. So you have to change the ratios accordingly. Use the same ingredients, but change the ratios according to your climate, regarding a higher moisture or a lower moisture, quickly drying soil or a slow drying soil. Whatever it is, you have to change the composition of the ingredients according to your climates.